So today we're talking about the joyous messiness of love. And this talk was inspired by a book I'm reading. I think I swear I'm going to take like 4 months to read this book. It's called Soulmates by Thomas Moore. And it's not, it's funny because even the title isn't something that I would normally be called to because, there's a lot of not weird, there's a lot of ideas around soulmates and these kind of things that can be very confusing for us in relationships. But it was one of these days I was walking down the street and up here, I don't know if they have these where you live, but they have these little like little libraries on people's front lawns, and they're like about the size of a large birdhouse, and they're just a little book library. And it's sort of a leave a book, take a book kind of thing. And they just have them on people's front lawns, kind of facing the sidewalk. And you can just go up and take a book and give a book. And it's just this weird little free thing, right? Anyway, so I'm walking down the street. I see one of these little book libraries, and I was like, ooh. And I saw this book. Wow, I'll tell you, it is so inspiring. This book is blowing my mind. So, yeah, little free libraries. And so this, I'm not necessarily going to talk so much about what he says in the book, but one of the concepts he had is just kind of blown my mind. And the concept is the difference between the soul and the spirit, especially in relationships. And again, we have lots of different definitions. Someone asked me recently what my definition of soul and spirit was, which was very different than how he would describe it, right? But how he described it was the soul was the part of us who has the experience. It's like the soul wants to be attached. The soul wants to have the emotions. The soul wants to have the messiness, right? The spirit wants freedom. The spirit wants to see the big picture. The spirit sort of wants to not have all the attachment, right? It's kind of the desire of attachment of the soul and the desire of detachment of the spirit. And how this causes this huge conflict in relationships because we have all of those things. We want the freedom to be able to do and feel and think anything we want. But oh, the lovely juice of being like so connected and entangled, and like it's just, our soul just digs it, right? And this has been rolling through my consciousness for the last few weeks, how differently we would look at our relationships if we considered it this way. If we considered how one aspect of us, and we can kind of leave his paradigm for a moment, and we can imagine maybe our mental ideas of what a relationship is and the juiciness that the soul experiences. Like, for example, this doesn't really have much to do with our talk, but I just want to mention it because it was interesting that he talks about. He said, for example, like sometimes when we have grief, right? Like maybe we get divorced, or maybe our partner dies, or maybe any kind of grief, family, children, parents, any kind of grief. At the beginning, maybe you let yourself grieve. Not everybody does, right? Which is hard. But maybe in the beginning you let yourself grieve, especially while the wheels are turning that society asks us to, right? But then there's a point where the spirit or the mind says, now that's enough. Now you've got to get on with it. You can't still be crying about this. It's been 5 months. It's been a year. It's been now it's time to get on with it. But the soul needs more time. Because it was the soul that was connected. It was the soul that was attached. It was the soul that was entangled. And it's really interesting to imagine the experience of the soul that says, no, I still need to chew this up for a while. I still need to cry more. I still need to be angry. I still need to feel. I still need to be human, right? And this is just You know how you have an idea and it kind of starts to reformat everything you've ever thought about relationships? That's what this one is for me. It's just, wow. Imagine you just sort of honored both and it was okay. We did a talk a little while ago about living in the tension of life, right? That it's not about only being on this side or only being here, or the tension of here's who I am right now and here's who I could be, right? Well, what if we fully love who we are right now in total presence and we are in constant expansion into our biggest, truest self? So there's a tension in between that place, and that true life happens in that tension. That's where we are alive, right? If we only go into the future, we're not really alive. We're just like a robot getting to the future. And if we're only in the present, it's so easy to become stagnant, right? So it's the same thing here. So imagine in relationships, you have this soul, the soul that wants to be attached, the soul that wants to love and be entangled and be all like, oh, heart palpitations and all excitement. Then you have the spirit that says, yes, but there's more. There's freedom, there's flight, there's expansiveness mentally, there's all these other things. And you, who we are in relationship, lie somewhere in that rubber band, right? We lie somewhere in there, and maybe we're constantly moving through that continuum. Maybe we're constantly like, oh, I'm all in, and then no, I want out, and then oh, I'm all in. And that's life. Like, what if that's the point? What if that's what it is to feel alive? That we don't have to just be a puddle of muck because something didn't go our way, and we don't have to be completely detached and stoic and take the high road and have the yogic, you know. What if we're meant to be in the middle? And that's what I mean by the messiness of love, the messiness of life. But specifically, today we're talking about love. That we don't actually ever know where we're going to be on that continuum today. In all the relationships we're in, not just intimate, loving relationships, but even relationships with our children or our friends or our parents or our neighbors or our landlords or whoever. Like, what if it's always meant to be alive, right? And that we are just constantly pulled between these two ends, right? So this morning, before I do a talk, I always sit and I ask, why do I want to talk about this today, right? And a few things that came to me were, we suffer so much in relationships, right? Why do we suffer so much? You know that difference between pain and suffering? That sometimes, like if you're disappointed or you're heartbroken, that's pain. But then why do we suffer? Why does the mind then take us through it over and over and over again? And we just relive this moment of pain long after it's passed, right? Why is that? We often also really take relationships personally. That when relationships get messy or they get painful, that somehow that's about us. That it's a character flaw, or that it's because we're not lovable, or that there's something wrong with us. And then it drives us into some kind of existential crisis, right? That it's about me, and oh my God, no one's ever going to love me, and I'm going to be alone the rest of my life. And it does this thing, which it actually doesn't make any sense, right? When you really kind of look at it. And again, when we imagine life within this perspective, right? It's just a fun thought experiment. If we reframe all of our relationships within this idea of this continuum between spirit and soul, and all of our relationships lie in that continuum. It's not about us. It's nothing personal. It's an experience, right? As soon as we're actually dealing with other sovereign, dynamic, living beings, We are always going to be playing here. If we want everyone to be robots, and we also want to be robots, perhaps we can find a singular point and just stay there, right? But, well, okay, here's my confession. I am a dyed-in-the-wool romantic. I should tell you that straight off the bat, that everything we're going to talk about today is coming from someone who loves romance and loves the messiness of love, loves, you know, I am so thankful for every relationship I've ever had. I'm thankful for every minute of my 20-year marriage, the ups and the downs and the endings and the beginnings. I'm thankful for every second of every relationship, right? I would never want to give them up. I would never want to give up a moment of any of them, right? And some of them were a little dark. I once met a guy in my travels, and he was a downright sociopath. And it was a fascinating kind of experience to watch and go, wow, you're really mean. Like, it didn't work on me because he was sort of like picking at my self-image or something like that. And he would just say these little insults here and there. And I'd be like, what's your game? What are you doing? But I don't regret a moment of it, right? So just have to give that disclaimer that there's not a bone in my body that desires any kind of robotic existence. So just, disclaimer up front. Yeah, okay. So what's funny is I don't know why I want to tell you this, but you never know why relationships come, right? You never know why they come into our lives. I remember when I was first married, and I've told you guys before, like, I'm such an idealist, right? And I can so easily live in my brain. I can so easily live in there's like a saying that it says, oh, how does it go? A neurotic builds castles in their mind, and a psychotic lives there. Sometimes I think I might be a little psychotic. No, not really, but you know what I mean. Because I would build these idealist ideas in my mind, and I would force myself to live there no matter what, because that was the right way to be, and that's what a perfect life was. Well, after I got married, and I was pregnant with my first child, I had all kinds of pride about I was just going to be this perfectly healthy pregnant woman, and I was going to be glowing, and I was going to be, this is this unmessiness of love, unmessiness of child rearing and childbearing and what have you, right? Because I had figured out the perfect formula, and I was going to be perfect at this. Well, I was so sick for the whole 9 months that I was pregnant. I have never been so skinny in my life. I just kept losing weight every week. I was very, very, very sick. And then when I had my child, my son, I nearly died during the birth. It was very, very, very traumatic. And then he colicked for 11 months. This kid cried. If he was awake, he was screaming. Well, I'll tell you, this broke my crystal palace in my mind of all the things I thought I was going to do right and wrong, and I was a terrible mother, and I was obviously all these things. But it was such an important time. And to this day, my son, he's kind of this huge, giant of a human now. He's 26 years old. But he's a very sensitive man, and he was a very sensitive child, even as a baby. And who knows why he cried Maybe we needed to bond. Maybe we needed that extra time together. Maybe I needed to get out of my head and into the world. Who knows? But those 2 years that I was pregnant, and then after he was he never slept. I didn't sleep for 11 months. I was barely human by the end of it. I shouldn't have been driving. Like, I remember driving the car, and I would look down at the speedometer, and I was going like 60 kilometers an hour. And I couldn't go any faster. Like, I actually didn't have the response ability or the reaction time. I actually couldn't drive any faster. I wasn't even human, right? But that time also has given me great compassion. You know, there's something about getting thrown onto the pavement, right? That really makes you go, okay, people have really hard times. Don't judge them if they're tired. Don't worry about that person driving really slowly in front of you. They may not have slept for 3 months, you know. Anyway, I think in many ways that experience with my first child kind of broke the mold that relationships and life and love and children and marriage were supposed to be this perfect story. You know, it broke that idealism in me. And then the hilarious thing is my daughter was born almost 2 years later. And she was the quietest child. she was hilarious. And to this day, she's a completely different personality than my son. And I would wake up in the morning and there'd be no baby crying. And I would race to the nursery because there was no way, like, she must still be sleeping. And she would just be lying there going, just staring at me. And I was like, babies do that? They don't just scream when they wake up? Anyway, and and then she lived on my back for a year because we bought the farm, we bought the family dairy farm the day she was born. And so it was just me and my husband milking a zillion cows. So my daughter just lived on my back, kind of, you know, in a backpack. Anyway, so I was gifted with a much easier second child. So one of the first things we have to ask ourselves is, when we suffer in relationships, when we can't embrace this messiness, right? This is a really interesting question. Why is the messiness uncomfortable? Why do we fight it? Why do we fight the contrast? Like in the words of Abraham Hicks, when there's something amuck, there's simply contrast in our life, and the contrast asks us to rise up, to learn, to respond, to ponder, right? That is the expansion of the spirit. And I understand this is all within the context of total choice. Responding to contrast in relationship doesn't mean staying in an abusive relationship. It doesn't mean staying in a situation where your soul doesn't get to sing, enjoy, and have fun and enjoy. Everything I'm saying is within the context of full choice and whatever's on your soul's path. So imagine you're in a relationship and contrast appears, difficulty, and it could be anything. It could be a personality clash. It could be injury, illness. It could be all kinds of things that are amok, right? It could be sexual dysfunction. It could be financial struggles. It could be anything, right? Why? It could be the ending of a relationship. Why do we suffer instead of responding to the contrast? What is that? So one of the things we have to look at in terms of understanding why we suffer instead of just feel the pain, process the pain, and move on, is we have to look at why we're in the relationship to begin with, right? Because, I mean, we're not all just starting today. We're not just saying, aha, I've learned these new things and I'm going to go out and find a relationship today. Some of us are in long-term relationships, right? Some of us have been in relationships for 40 years, 10 years, 5 years, whatever. The question is, when we first started into this relationship, why did we enter into it, right? Historically, you just got into a relationship. A couple was simply the foundational economic unit of society, right? Maybe you were lucky enough to marry for love, or maybe you just got married because they liked you back, right? Maybe it wasn't perfect. Maybe there wasn't love and romance, but I'm attracted to them and they're attracted to me, and our life paths seem to be cohesive enough, so we'll live together. Well, so then what you have maybe at best is you have a companion. You have someone to watch your favorite shows with at night. You have someone to go on vacation with. Maybe on some level you want to be married because it's financially stable, right? So you're in the relationship because you're afraid to be out on your own, right? Or maybe you just want a, I'm going to say this. This is not against men, just so you know. I love men. But so a lot of my friends and family have become single over the last few decades, right? There's sort of a huge shift in relationship dynamics, and people are asking for more than maybe our grandparents and parents asked for. And the number of women who I know whose partner, whose husband died, or they got divorced or whatever, and they were in their 40s or 50s. So I'm talking right now, who I'm specifically talking about, are aunts and people I know who right now are, say, 80. So if you went back 20 years, they would have been, in their late 50s, 60s. But they're of that, they were born maybe in the 30s and 40s, right? Well, once their marriage was over for whatever reason, they would date. And what they found was what most of the men wanted of that generation. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but I'm not painting a wide brush here. But they just wanted a wife. They wanted someone to cook the meals and take on that role, right? And it's not evil. Like I remember when I was first single, my daughter was living with me in Toronto, and I was dating a lot, and I was I love being in a relationship. I'm a romantic. Like I love that stuff, right? But with that came some heartbreak and disappointment and ego bruising and all kinds of stuff. And my daughter, who is particularly perceptive, let's say, I don't know, I must have been going through something, and I was all upset about something. And she's sitting there, and she was all of 19 maybe at the time, and she looks at me and she says, Mom, it's like you've got this shadow figure beside you, the shadow figure of a man, and you believe that you are whole because you and this shadow figure are together. And she says, it's like you're dating, just looking to fill the shadow that is missing beside you. I was like, she was so right. And it wasn't just because I'd been married for 20 years, because even before that, there was such a training inside of, and I'll say us, but me for sure, and I'm sure lots of you guys, that said, after school was ready, after we completed high school or university, the next step is you find a partner. It doesn't matter whether it's heterosexual or same sex, whatever, but you find a partner. And then once you find a partner, then you can go on in life. Then you can pursue a career. Then you can pursue children. But you have to start with this 2-person building block, and then the rest of your life can continue. And if that double building block for some reason disappears, your life is on hold until you find another one. This is a thing, right? And I'm sure I'm not alone with that. And so it was a really that's when it was shortly after that that I decided to go celibate and stop dating and stop it because I had to somehow get rid of this shadow person beside me. Like I had to figure out who I was without this other block, right? So what's interesting about this, no matter how that looks for you, right? Whether it's just simply wanting someone financially, sexually, whatever, but the companion, but you just want this other person. That's what I want. Well, then of course, if messiness comes, if contrast appears, it's like, oh no, right? Like it's like, oh, this is like threatening what I want. I found the person. I found the person to fill that slot. We can't have contrast. We can't have messiness. We can't have any problems. And then we're gonna push back like crazy, right? We're just gonna fight it for all we're worth instead of looking at what's happening. But of course, realizing that the reason we're in the relationship is security. Whether it's emotional security, financial security, sexual security, raising my children's security, whatever. If that's the reason I'm in the relationship, we are going to suffer if things aren't going our way, if things aren't calm, simple, and robotic, right? If they are not going according to the rules, we don't want to actually raise any problems because this is a security. This is a first chakra question. Our first chakra is our survival. Like this is tipping into our survival self-protection mechanisms, right? This is no small thing. So of course, how can we possibly accept anything that's messy? How can we possibly accept anything on this continuum? How can we possibly even be alive in it? Right? If all we really want is a single state and we just want that to continue forever because that's what gives me the security, and then I don't have to go out and find another one to replace you. Right? It sounds so cold. And I mean, this concept still rings through my soul. I'm sure it rang through my mom and her mom and my dad and everybody. Like I'm sure it's deeply ancestral, right? And societal. So this isn't like some big character flaw. Or if it is, we're all sharing it. So that's the first one, is when we're in the relationship for this kind of security building block thing, we will not embrace the messiness of love, right? Because we're not in it for love. We're in it for security on some level, even if we entangle our heart in there. So then, that's another reason that we seek relationship or commitment or long-term love or even short-term love. Self-worth. And this is a big one, right? And it's funny, when I was growing up, the mythology, I'll almost call it a mythology, that says, well, if someone's not married, what's the next question? Well, what's wrong with them? Oh, they've got a bad personality? Oh, are they too short, too fat, too tall? Are they difficult to get along with? Like, there's this assumption that if you do not have a partner, it's obviously a character flaw and no one wants to be with you. This is, I mean, I don't know about you, but for me, whether that's in the movies, whether it's whatever, like I remember in high school reading The Taming of the Shrew, right? Shakespeare's Taming of the Shrew. And and the whole premise, wow, I don't know if I can actually tell this story properly in the land of things I haven't really ever talked about. So, the Taming of the Shrew, there's two sisters. I'm going to tell the story. It may be wrong. It's two sisters. The oldest sister, Katerina, Kate, but her name's Katerina. She is a shrew, which is hilarious because in that time, I don't know, 1400s or whenever they were written, it simply meant that she had opinions and she didn't want to just do as she was told by a man. She actually had, you know, she was difficult because she wouldn't obey. Maybe that was me. I don't know. But then she had a younger sister who was beautiful and lovely and docile and so lovely to look upon and la 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 la, right? And she wanted to marry so and so. I don't know who it was, but she wanted to marry someone, some interesting Shakespearean name that we all know. I just can't remember. So the problem was the father knew that no one was ever going to marry Kate because she was so troublesome. And so I don't remember whether he hired somebody to marry her, but she had to be tamed first, right? So I don't know whether it's just me. It could just be me. But this really got into my consciousness on a real unconscious level, in a way that, and it isn't even that I rose up in female solidarity that, yes, I want to be the shrew, right? It was the opposite effect. I never want to be the shrew. I never want to be the one that no one wants to marry. I never want to be the one that people think is difficult or unattractive, or who would ever want to marry her? Like, oh my God, she's so awful. Like, this got deep into my psyche, right? That if I didn't have a partner, there was something wrong with me. And this is in all kinds of Hollywood movies. This is a huge part of our current mythology, right? The beautiful maiden, so with millions of suitors, she just doesn't even know who to marry. And then the evil sister, the ugly sister, who no one wants to marry, the spinster sister. Oh my God. Sorry. So I went through a time a few years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, where I was kind of struggling with this one, this dark night of the soul, this bit of training that said, there's something wrong with you, Katrina. What's wrong with you? And I went over to my friend's house, and he and his wife for dinner. It was around Christmas time, and we got chatting, and they were like, how are you doing? And I said, well, I'm pretty. I don't tend to say fine. It's not really in my repertoire. And I said, well, the truth is, I'm actually really sort of going through a dark night of the soul about self-worth and, not being in a relationship, and I'm really struggling with this, and this is really where I'm at right now. My friend's wife gets up and says, I've got the perfect book for you. And she gets up, walks over to the bookshelf. I think I tell this story in the book about you don't have to eat the eyeballs. I can't remember. But she goes over, picks up this book called Spinster. And she gives me the book. Well, I was so mad. I was like, are you kidding? You just gave me a book called Spinster? And I'm going through an existential self-worth crisis? Are you kidding? You crazy woman? Well, that book sat in the corner of my apartment staring at me for months. It just stared at me. And then one day, it was actually New Year's Eve. I remember I woke up and something in me said, read the book. And I'm so glad I did. Like, so glad. And so, for example, did you know that the term spinster came from a time in the United States where the only job women could have, because women couldn't work, is they would be hired by the textile mills as they would spin wool, they would spin the cloth, right? So these women were the only women who actually were financially independent. So they also often lived in rooming houses all together. So they had this really interesting sisterhood. And they didn't have to marry a man. And they didn't have to put up with the nonsense that, women put up with back in the 1800s. And so there was sort of this real negative perception of them because men would court them and say, "Oh, well, hey, you wanna come darn my socks and, a little something something?" Or whatever was expected of women in the 1800s. And these women would say, "No, I'm fine. That I have no interest in doing that." So therefore they were like, spinsters. Who would ever want one of them? And this is where it all came from. This whole concept of, that being a spinster was a negative thing. It was just that she was an independent woman in a time when that never happened. Anyway, brought great peace to my heart. I'll tell you that one. I'll tell you that. But so now let's imagine. So if you had any kind of training like me, male or female, right, that being in a relationship was some kind of reflection as to whether or not you were lovable, whether you were attractive, whether you were desirable, right, sexually especially, right? If anything goes wrong in the relationship, if the other person says, "I'm not really satisfied with this," or "I'm really kind of, I wish we could do sort of this in sexually," or "I'm really feeling like I'm not being heard," or whatever, this is a direct affront at my self-worth. It's like, "No, don't say that. I'm not the shrew. I'm not ugly. I'm not sexually unattractive. Don't say it." Like, we're so instantly defensive. Right? Because this is life and death. This is like, "No, you have no idea how important this is to me." Like this, and for some reason, this is ego shattering. Right? How often do we live for years and years and years holding the pain of a past relationship that maybe they left, or they cheated, or they did this, or they did that, or whatever, and it's like, that's them. That's just what they did. That has nothing to do with us. That's their action. That's that soul's action. Why are we taking it personally? Like, why are we taking it personally? It has nothing to do with us. Right? Like, it's really interesting when we really look at that. Why is it so? And I mean, maybe it's the first one. Maybe it's that foundational security piece. Maybe it's our own ego. And I'm saying this not like, again, I'm not saying it's this huge character flaw because this, I'm basically talking about me. It's like this is like the human condition. Right? Maybe not everyone's like that, but a lot of us are. A lot of us want relationships to feel good about ourselves. Right? It's easy peasy. So then sometimes, this is maybe more current and maybe in the past too, sometimes the only reason we want to be in a relationship is to have sex, right? We just want to have sex on a regular basis. We don't really want to interact. We don't really want to spend time together. We don't really want to spend nights staring at sunsets and all that kind of thing. We're just kind of horny, and we just really want to have someone that we always know we can have sex with at the end of the day. And this sounds kind of crass, but what if that's true? Male or female? What if that's kind of all we want? That's all that fits in our life right now, right? And again, historically, that's kind of what a lot of people were treated like. My stepmother, she had a good friend, and she used to say that, so of course she's, in her 80s now, and she used to say that she felt like a a maid with bedroom privileges. This is a thing, right? So again, if we're actually only in the relationship for sex, that's all we're actually there for, and any messiness arises, what are we going to do? We're going to push back hard because it's like, oh, like, and sex is interesting, right? Sex is so much intimacy and hopefully vulnerability and all that kind of thing. And so if anything goes amok, right, it's just so easy to take it super, super, super personally, right? It's just it's a very, very tender topic. The other big thing, another reason which sort of blends into some of those other ones, is that sometimes we choose to be in a relationship and it is just pride, right? It is, I need to appear like I am in a relationship. Like, yes, there's self-worth stuff here and there's patterning and all that, but I need to be in a relationship. Like, I know for me, near the end of my marriage, a huge guiding factor as to why I stayed married as long as I did was pride. I counseled people in marriage issues. I was a spiritual teacher. I was all the, whatever. It's all it's all such nonsense, but it still sounded really true in my mind at the time. And so I had real pride in being in a relationship, being married. I liked being married, right? And so that's a tough thing to lose. So again, if anything goes amok, now you're hitting my pride buttons. I'm going to push back. And the other big one is just the fear of being alone. A lot of people are afraid of being alone for many of the reasons we've already talked about. And some of it's just the fear of being alone. So if anything pushes back, we push back harder, or we withdraw, or we become depressed, or whatever. But the truth is, we actually just need to learn to love our own company. And that being alone, first of all, we're never alone. All you have to do is make a phone call somebody, go out for coffee, join a club, do something. There's no reason for us to ever be alone. There's 7.5 billion people we can possibly come into contact with, right? But that fear will keep us not rocking the boat, not actually addressing, not allowing us to move along this continuum. So now let's imagine that we begin where we started, that we are on a soul's journey, and this soul wants to experience attachment. It wants to experience love. It wants to experience this earthly incarnation we're in. Oh, it's so interesting here with all these humans and right? Like, oh, children, what a fascinating idea. We could bear them, we could adopt them, we could do this. Isn't that an interesting soul's journey? I wonder what it will be like. Oh, I could have a relationship with you. What will that be like? What will happen when these two souls merge together? These two incredibly different, unique individuals come together. What will this be like? What will that feel like? What will that experience be? Can you imagine going into a relationship like that? How different that is? Then all of a sudden, something comes and the other person goes, well, I don't really like it when you do that. Really? Tell me more. That's fascinating. I wouldn't have known that. That's why I did it. I didn't know that this would bother you. Let's talk about it. And I'm not being sarcastic, really, genuinely, wow, you really see things differently than I do. Let's go there, right? Imagine, even in intimacy, in sexual intimacy, being able to say, hey, I kind of like it when you do this, really? Oh, okay, I'll try that. As opposed to, oh, so how I do it isn't good enough? Right? It changes everything because there's no defensiveness, right? And if the other person's like, I don't know if this is going to work out, Maybe you've gone on a million dates. Maybe you even moved in together. Maybe you did cool things. Maybe you had great experiences. And then one day the other person wakes up and says, I don't feel it anymore. Something's amuck. I don't know. I just feel, maybe the continuum is heading over towards the spirit side. And for some reason, I really need to have a different experience right now. I'm really sorry. I'm not, my intention isn't to hurt you, but this is kind of what I'm feeling. And the person here is like, really? And I to be super heartbroken and to cry and to flail and to, go drinking with your friends or whatever it is you want to do, whatever that soul needs to recover from this loss, right? I mean, it's possible that maybe in an ideal psychic and empathic world, you already know it too, and you go, yes, I've kind of been feeling that myself. That could happen, right? Not often happens that way. There's normally one heartbroken person, right? So you're heartbroken, and it hurts, and it's awful, and you cry, and you flail, and you journal angry things for like months, and but what if that's great? What if that's an amazing life experience? What if we aren't meant to be Spock, right? We're not meant to just robotically go through life. Heartbreak is great. And again, the reason I say this is that if we have a philosophy that says there's something wrong with heartbreak, or that I'll never recover from heartbreak, or I'll never be able to love again if I'm heartbroken, if we have a philosophy that believes that, what that means is we are taking that heartbreak and we are repeating it over and over and over again in a vicious cycle in our mind for the rest of our life. That's a philosophy. That's a mental pattern we're doing. We are choosing to relive the heartbreak for the rest of our life. Why? This is really important to consider why we're doing that. So now what if in our new context we say, well, heartbreak is always a possibility. Where there is attachment, there is possible pain. Right? It's sort of that idea, that when the Buddhists say that, life is suffering. And again, I know I'm kind of using words differently here, but even I think the phrase life is suffering is not what we think it is, right? It's not this perpetual reliving of heartbreak and suffering. It just simply means that if we all live in the blissful oneness, with no attachment, no connection, no interaction with others, we live in our cave in the Himalayas and we simply sit in full union with God, we don't lose anything. We still have that inside too, but that we never lose. So we have this inside. But if we choose to play in the world of duality, if we choose to come out into the village and interact with everybody, if we choose to attach, if we choose that soul's love, that soul's entanglement, that actual connection, we open ourselves up, this world of duality is transient. And that means that things change, things grow, things expand. We expand, right? We change, we grow. And at some point, this attachment may uncouple and it may move on. And there may be heartbreak in that. But if philosophically we understand that that's part of it, it's almost it's part of what makes a relationship alive. When you know that you always have the choice to leave and you never are sitting in this stagnant requirement or obligation, you know that around the corner, if things really aren't to my soul's liking, or this really isn't, I think, what I signed up for. Like we say things like that. I don't think this is what I signed up for. But think of that on a spiritual level. Like, what does that mean? What did your soul sign up for? Right? if you're like me and you love romance, then that's what I believe I signed up for. So if I'm in a situation that there's no romance, then I didn't sign up for this. That's okay. I can move on, right? And maybe I had to have a million experiences of the opposite or whatever to really clarify what this soul really wanted, right? Sometimes we have to, you know, we just need some clarification sometimes. But imagine how different that is. Like, even imagine the difference when we perceive our relationship, say, with our children or even our parents differently, right? It's really common to have issues with our children, right? I mean, this is a huge deal. And again, if we have an idea, like any of those things I just said about relationships, like for me, I watched a lot of Julie Andrews movies when I was young, right? I watched The Sound of Music every year, and Mary Poppins, and all these things. And I truly believed, I truly had a philosophy that if I was a good mother and a good person, then my children would happily follow me till the ends of my days, singing songs and playing with butterflies. And if I was a bad mother, bad things would happen and my kids would be bad. This is a serious philosophy I had in my mind, right? So when my son started crying almost as soon as he got home, and he never stopped, I took that personally, right? What was wrong with me? Why wasn't I just like Julie Andrews? What's going on here? Right? This is about me. This is self-worth. This is pride. How come it's not just happy? What's going on? This is so wrong. And there is pride, because then all of a sudden if people come over and your baby never stops crying, and then they look at you and they go, you're not really natural at being a mother. Is that, people say crazy stuff to mothers, and it's like, no, I'm exhausted and he never stops crying. You know what I mean? It's like all the same things apply. But instead, if we look at our children and we actually really recognize them as little dynamic, sovereign beings, and by sovereign, I mean they have their own connection to God. They have their own connection to soul, spirit, the universe, and they are walking a path. We don't understand it. It has very little to do with us, right? And imagine every time there's contrast, we look at them and we think, what's going on here? Tell me about it. That's why for me, I loved when my kids turned about 10. I wasn't really good at the early years. I struggled with those years. Because I loved once their prefrontal cortex was actually developed and they could actually explain things and tell me about how they saw the universe and we could have conversations. I was literally that mom, and the kids would be like, well, I saw this. Really? Tell me all about it. I want to know. And I really wanted to know. I really wanted to know their perception of the universe, And when things went amok, it was if you guys, I know lots of you guys have read my book, Tantric Intimacy, but I talk, we talk about love, right? We talk about the foundations of love, agape being the foundation. And then I think it's the chapter on philia, which is in Greek, it's brotherly love. But this is the love of when you trust somebody, when they're your confidant, when you open up beyond just simple agape, simple love of mankind, and you actually trust this specific person. And I think that's the chapter I tell the story about going to the couch with my kids, and whenever they were fighting or whenever they were going through something, like my son was bullied really badly in school, and my daughter's a fiery redhead. I tell you all the great stories. She always reminds me every so often. She goes, I wasn't always easy, Mom. Oh my God. Okay, so I gotta tell you guys a story. I don't know if I've told you this one already. I might have. So for example, my daughter, here's a classic Taylor Boss example. So Taylor, and again, I hold this in her because she has this incredible fire inside of her, right? To this day, she's 23 now, but, and so I'll just quickly tell you the story because I know we're at the hour. So she was about, like, I don't know, a year old, maybe. She was old enough to stand, but not much more, kind of thing, right? So she was just little. And she was in the bathtub. And, she's playing in the bathtub, but she wasn't old enough that I could leave her there, right? I'd have to be with her in the bathroom all the time. So I would bring in like 4 loads of laundry and everything. And while she was playing in the bathroom, I would be folding laundry and I'd clean the bathroom and I would do everything I possibly could in the bathroom while she was having her tub. And after, I don't know, half an hour or 45 minutes, I was like, okay, honey, you got to get out of the tub. The day's going to go on now. She was like, no, I'm not ready. I'm not done. And I'm like, I know, sweetie, but you gotta get out of the tub. That's just the way it is. And I can't leave you here. So you have to get out of the tub. So of course I drain the water out of the tub and she just starts to scream. She's so mad. And I'm like, I'm sorry, honey. There's nothing I can do. So I pull her out of the tub. And I mean, if any of you guys have ever grabbed a little wet child who doesn't want to be grabbed, like it's just like, so I'm like, I place her outside the tub and she's standing there and she crosses her little arms like this. And she just started to scream. Like her little feet are planted on the ground, arms crossed. And she's just like, like total Charlie Brown mouth, like just screaming off the top of her lungs. Well, I don't know what to do. I can't leave her there. And I know she'll just sort of tuck her out in time. And I mean, and it's one of those things as a parent when you know that there's nothing actually wrong, right? They've just been thwarted. They just didn't get their way. That's all, right? So the bathroom was here and the living room was here and there was a couch right here. So I'm sitting on the couch here and she's here and she's just screaming and I'm sitting on the couch with my dog. And we had this cat named Oliver and so she's sitting there screaming and I'm just sort of sitting there hanging out, just, I don't know, holding space for her or whatever. I wouldn't have called it that then, but I was just sort of witnessing her fury, I guess. And I just sat there and while she screamed. And eventually the cat looks at me and the cat's like, why aren't you doing something about this? And I'm like, what am I going to do? Right? She's just going to keep screaming. Doesn't matter where I take her in the house. Right? So the cat walks over to Taylor, puts her and she kind of looks at her and looks back at me, looks back at Taylor, puts her little paws on Taylor's like arms, because Taylor's like little at this point, right? So the cat reaches up, puts her paws on her arms, looks at Taylor. Taylor's still screaming at the top of her lungs, like, I mean, massive lungs, right? And the cat bit her, right? For like a fraction of a moment. Taylor goes, right? And then she just continued screaming, right? And anyway, the cat looks at me and the cat literally is like looked at me and went like, okay, I've done all I can. I don't know what you're going to do. And the cat walked out of the bathroom and headed for the kitchen. It was so funny. It's like my favorite Taylor story because anyway, my point is that Taylor wasn't always easy. So she's a strong personality. I like strong personalities. Again, right? It's kind of that messiness of love thing, right? It's fun to play with titans. It's fun to play with people who have an opinion and they're putting it on the table. Like that's awesome. So when things went amok, and it went amok between my kids, it went amok individually, and not just bad behavior, but just sometimes real crisis in their lives, right? We would go and sit on the couch and we would talk and listen and ponder and cry and hug each other or whatever the moment called for. But there was an embracing of the messiness. There was a, let's dive into this. Like, what's really going on here? Because what else are we supposed to be doing? Like, is life really just about creating this structure of the day and walking through it like a robot and walking through our relationships like robots? Right? Our soul is here. Our heart is here. We are here to connect. We're here to have loss. We're here to have the whole experience. And it's just so interesting to kind of just change the framework that we look at our relationships in, that we fully understand between us, that we have this beautiful perception of spirit that says, I just want to be free of all of it. I just want to, roam the earth. And on the other hand, that I really want to be connected and have all the messiness and the joy and the emotions and everything. And I find it a fascinating way of looking at everything. I think every single relationship in my life has been somewhat adjusted in a really positive way, in a real way that it suddenly allows movement, it allows response, it allows growth, it allows introspection in a whole new way. So thanks for letting me share this with you.